I also wanted to talk a little bit about some other Republican politics. Right? This is a little bit in the politics realm, but Donald Trump was just on CNN at a town hall. And in it, he was asked by a voter about the bump stock ban that he imposed during his presidency, right? And his response, and I'll just read the quote real quick here. He said, quote, "As you know, the bump stocks are actually a very unimportant thing. NRA, I went with them and they said it doesn't mean anything, or actually all they do is teach you how to shoot very inaccurately. So we did that." And I just want to talk about this a little bit because I think it's pretty relevant to the primary here, because when I look at Donald Trump's record, there seems to be a fairly good opening to his right on this issue as far as what he's actually accomplished while president. This obviously doesn't mean that there were no pro-gun things that he did. There were. But, he is the person behind the bump stock ban, which has now twice been ruled unconstitutional by federal appeals courts. And, I'm interested in how you think him doubling down on support for this and sort of citing the NRA as, his general blanket protection for him doing this will actually play in this upcoming election.
Well, I mean, among gun owners in particular, I don't know how well it's going to play. Blaming the NRA and as you pointed out at the Reload, the NRA was initially supportive of reclassifying bump stocks, and then when the final rule was published, they ended up opposing it. To claim, well, I mean, listen, the NRA was the voice of authority. I think it probably was the case when it came to President Trump. We have heard that Trump was also initially in favor of a ban on so-called assault weapons, but was talked out of it by the NRA. We've all seen his comment publicly about, take the guns now and due process later. Right. Apparently that was another, position that he walked back after, talking to folks at the NRA. So it may very well be that Donald Trump isn't just, throwing the NRA under the bus, but he's accurately describing how he came to that position.
Oh, yeah.
The problem is that, again, I think for some gun owners, the NRA's image has certainly been tarnished over the past couple of years. And so I don't know that that's really going to matter as an excuse. The other issue that I think that Trump has is that bump stock ban opened the door for what we've seen with the Biden administration. And so if he's not willing to acknowledge, I mean, look, even if you were to say, look, I got bad advice from the NRA, that would be one thing, right? But to say, well, this is unimportant. Well, it's not unimportant.
Right.
You might think bump stocks are unimportant. You might think stabilizing braces are unimportant, or, building your own gun doesn't really matter. But all of these things are building towards bigger and broader bans enacted not by Congress, but through an administrative rule that comes complete with, a federal prison sentence for those who might violate it. So, the issue is important, even if you don't think bump stocks are. And I think that Trump failed to appreciate that or acknowledge that during the town hall last night. So you're right. I think there is an opening to the right of Donald Trump. Whether that's enough to actually stop Donald Trump's popularity right now, I think remains to be seen, because I think there are a lot of Trump supporters who are willing to overlook particular disagreements they might have with him in favor of, the candidate overall.
Yeah, that's sort of been part of his magic as a politician since he got in, right? It's certainly not the first time that he's taken a position that was unorthodox among Republican base. And oftentimes he's been able to push the Republican base towards what his positions were. And sometimes he changes them. It depends. But real quick, let's go over exactly what happened with the bump stock ban. For anybody who's forgotten how this went down. Because you and I were reporting on this at the time, right? And obviously the Las Vegas shooting happens. It's the worst mass shooting in American history, still is. That shooter used guns that had bump stocks equipped to them. And that's why this became especially controversial thing, there was a push in Congress to pass legislation to ban them. The NRA opposed that because the definition that they had come up with in this was a Democratic bill was very broad and could have been really almost any trigger that made you shoot capable of shooting a gun slightly faster. So, perhaps just a lighter trigger would have been illegal under this proposal. So the NRA was opposed to that, and then they came out with a statement that said, the Obama, ironically, they said the Obama administration wrongly classified bump stocks as stocks instead of machine guns, because what a bump stock does is that it allows you to fire a gun at a fast pace. We've shot one together, actually. It was the time that I've shot a bump stock was at your place, your old place, right, or a friend's property. But
a friend's property, yeah,
yeah, and so that's what set in motion the Trump administration's, or at least gave them cover to pursue the rulemaking process as a way of banning bump stocks, as a way of sort of reclassifying them ex post facto as machine guns. Now, this was done, to be fair to the NRA, because they thought that was the more politically viable route. They didn't want this legislation to happen. They thought there was going to be some sort of response, and they thought this was the less disruptive response. That is, I think, the line that if you were talking to somebody off the record about it, that's how they would explain it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, and I the question is again whether or not that's right, whether or not there was enough pressure that Democrat bill would have passed, right? Mm-hmm. But it's silly to ignore the politics of this. We can talk about shall not be infringed. We can talk about what the text of the Second Amendment says all day long. But again, every day politicians abuse our constitutional rights, not just our Second Amendment rights. So, they're playing politics, right? They're looking at, okay, how is this going to impact our majorities? Yeah. Right. And so I think that there was that feeling at the time that, yes, there had to be some type of response.
I do think that it didn't actually work out that way in practice, right? Because the rulemaking process takes a year. Yeah. And so maybe it was enough of a pressure relief valve that it kept Congress from doing something on this, but it took them a whole year to get this bill in practice. Then when the rule came out, the NRA didn't like it because it didn't allow for people who already had them to keep them, right? It was a confiscation order. You couldn't keep them. It was a federal felony if you did keep them, which I believe a lot of people did keep them, but so it kind of makes a mockery of the whole justice system anyway. But regardless, it's not like he got a lot of credit for doing this when it actually went into effect. I remember Ali Velshi on MSNBC at the day this went into effect. It was like a 5-second thing. He mentioned it, and that was it. There was no political who. I don't know that they really got any political capital. The best that you could say is that they maybe released some pressure with that legislation, but even that I think is questionable.
I do too. And I mean, again, I think that you can make the very same case about Bill Lee's temporary mental health restraining order. I think that's, if you want to be nice, he sincerely believes that this is a way to address mass shootings without violating anybody's Second Amendment rights. If you want to be politically cynical, this, again, is a pressure valve, right? This allows Republicans, if they get on board, to say, look, we did something without banning guns or things of that nature, and in the hopes that will be enough. Again, for gun control activists, it's never going to be enough. It just becomes another talking point that Republicans didn't do the right thing, right? That they cowed to the gun lobby and didn't pass strong red flag legislation. It just becomes another argument. So I'm with you. I don't know that there's. I don't know how much pressure actually gets released, maybe in the short term. But in the long term, I think moves like this play to the gun control lobby, not to Second Amendment supporters. It ends up putting us on the defense. It gives them an opening that they are more than happy to exploit. And they're really good about playing the long game.